Hey everybody, Dr. Chris here. Thanks for joining me. Today we're going to talk about energy expenditure. Okay, you may have heard calories in, calories out. If you want to gain weight, you take in more calories, expend less, and if you want to lose weight, you do the opposite. It's a lot more complicated than that, of course. There's all sorts of different things that contribute to the ins and the outs, but it's a good starting point, okay? If you're failing or not hitting your targets for the ins and the outs, a lot of those other things aren't going to matter as much. So let's make sure we get those foundations down. How much in, how much out, to get you to your goals, which is going to be different depending on every individual. So I'm going to focus in on just one aspect of the ins and the outs today, and that's energy expenditure. So your total energy expenditure, your TEE, that's how many calories you use in an entire day. And it's made up of a couple different components, okay? So TEE, total energy expenditure, how many calories your body uses in a 24-hour period. And remember, calories are how we measure fuel for the body, okay? So calories, how much fuel your body requires. So the three different components that it's made up of, the three broad components, resting energy expenditure, thermic effect of food, and physical activity. Those three things, that's it, okay? So we're gonna start with resting energy expenditure. There's some other terms, resting metabolic rate, basal metabolic rate, some very small differences between all these terms. A lot of people use them interchangeably, and for our purposes, that's fine. All right, but we'll call it resting energy expenditure. So this is how many calories your body needs if you lay in bed all day and don't do anything, okay? Because it takes some energy for your heart to beat and for your lungs to move and for your eyes to blink. And so, believe it or not, that's the largest portion of how many calories you use in a day, okay? I think a lot of people intuitively think, if I sit in bed all day, I'm not gonna burn any calories and I'm gonna be out of luck, okay? Well, not exactly, you know, it varies a little bit percentage-wise, and we'll talk about that in a minute here, but it's somewhere between 60% and 75% of your total energy expenditure is this resting energy expenditure, okay? So that's quite a bit. Now, depending on how physically active you are, if you're running marathons, then you're burning more calories there, so it's gonna be a smaller percentage of your total energy expenditure is from laying in bed, your resting energy expenditure. Someone who just, you know, doesn't have a lot of physical activity at all, that resting energy expenditure can be 3/4 of how many calories they use in a whole day, okay? So it's significant, okay? So resting energy expenditure, how many calories your body burns if you just lay in bed all day without moving around or doing anything else, okay? And that's between 60% and 75% of your total energy expenditure, how many calories you need in a 24-hour period, okay? Now, some of this is rough estimations, right? So if you use that, and I'm not recommending this, but 2,000 calories a day for the general population that you'll see on nutrition labels, 75% of that, according to what I'm telling you here, goes just to run essential body functions, okay? So everything else you do on top of that is bonus, okay? So one other point on the resting energy expenditure, it's very genetically determined, or at least genetics have a strong influence on it. So a few things that you really can't do much about for the most part, all right? Gender, so men tend to have more muscle mass, so their resting energy expenditure tends to be higher. Age tends to slow down with age for various reasons. Height, so not a whole lot you can do about height. Someone who's taller in general is going to have a higher resting energy expenditure. And then weight. So the higher your weight, in general, the higher your resting energy expenditure, and whether that's healthy weight or unhealthy weight, fat or lean mass, your energy expenditure is usually higher, okay? So then we get to thermic effect of food. So this is interesting and not something that a lot of people think about, but when you eat food, it takes energy to break it apart, right? Part of that's chewing, fueling the muscles, but also once it gets down into your digestive tract, your body's gotta break it down, it's gotta shuttle it to different parts of your body, it's gotta utilize that energy, and that takes energy, okay? It takes energy to get the energy out of food, okay? And that accounts for about 10% of your daily calories. So again, using that rough estimate, 2,000 calorie a day goal that you see on the nutrition label, 10% of that's 200 calories. So 200 calories you're burning just eating, okay? Take a piece of pizza, and if you eat that, you can think, hey, 10% of that I burned already just by eating it, okay? So free calories. So some interesting things about the thermic effect of food is that different kinds of food have a little bit different numbers, okay? So 10% is average. Some things like protein, it's gonna take more energy to break that apart. Think about a steak, okay? A lot of meat, protein, you gotta chew on it. Your body's gotta really work to break those bonds down. It takes a lot more energy, okay? You have something like a soda where it's just straight sugar, glucose is already broken down, gets absorbed very easily and utilized very easily. It doesn't take as much energy. So another interesting example I'd like to use is peanuts, okay? So if you have 100 calories of peanuts in your hand and you eat them, pretend you got the shells, it's gonna take a little bit of work. You gotta chew, you gotta break all that down, it's gotta get absorbed, processed by your body, whatever. That might be closer to the 10%. And you get 100 calories of peanut butter, kind of halfway digested for you, right? It's all mushed up, there's no shells in there, it's not very fibrous, that just goes in easy, gets broken down easy and gets absorbed easily and utilized much more easily. So that's probably gonna be a different percentage as far as how much energy it takes to break that down, okay? So thermic effect of food, very important. That's one reason that I tend to lean people more towards fat and protein. Lots of reasons, but that's one reason, is that you tend to burn more calories eating fat and protein than you do from simple carbohydrates, okay? Again, that's one reason of many. Okay, so we got resting energy expenditure, we got thermic effect of food, and then the last thing is physical activity, okay? So physical activity, we break into two different groups, okay? So physical activity is composed of exercise. That's where you have time set aside, say, hey, I'm gonna exercise, I'm gonna move around deliberately outside of my activities of daily living. Okay, and you know, we got a different talk on that. You could talk for years and years. People have been talking for years and years about exercise and all sorts of different ways and how much energy you need for this or that, what's better, what's more efficient. But just to let you know, that is can be just a tremendous contributor to this total energy expenditure. You think of someone like an Olympian in the peak training part of their season, they can burn thousands of calories doing their exercises and training, okay? Someone who's limited and they're in bed most of the day, they might have zero physical activity, okay? And so they just have the resting energy expenditure and the thermic effect of food with no physical activity. You know, someone who's doing, well, hold on, so that's the physical activity part, okay? And then the other part that I mentioned is the non-exercise activity, okay? So this is everything else you're doing, moving around. Again, I got a whole talk on NEAT, non-exercise activity of thermogenesis. This is all the movement, the physical activity that you're doing that's not formally exercise. So this is getting up to go brush your teeth. This is walking to the kitchen to make a sandwich. This is walking from your car to your office, those sorts of things. And that's, that changes how much energy is required to do that person to person. Again, it's genetically based, okay? Same with the thermic effect of food and the resting energy expenditure. There is genetic basis for some of this. And that is somewhere, again, a broad range depending on how physically active you are, but between 15% and 30% of a typical person's day and total energy expenditure is due to physical activity, both the non-exercise activity and the exercise activity, okay? Just to give you a ballpark idea where the non-exercise activity falls out, for a lot of people, it's somewhere between 400 and 600 calories a day. Again, you look at your total energy expenditure using that 2,000 calorie a day number. 600 calories isn't a huge component of it, all right? Nonetheless, it adds up over time, right? Standing instead of sitting, taking the stairs instead of the elevator within your abilities. Those sorts of things add up, you know, week to week, month to month, year to year, okay? And then the physical activity, you know, that's so variable, which is great because it gives you a lot of opportunity for that calories out part of the equation, right? So all sorts of opportunities with that, okay? And then I know I've mentioned a few times throughout the talk here, but genetics do contribute to this, but I don't want to leave anyone with a, you know, a bad taste in their mouth that, hey, everyone in my family has some weight issue, you know, everyone in my family exercises and they don't lose weight. I'm doomed, okay? You're not doomed. We just gotta find something that works for you. There's something that'll work for you, okay? You know, just to give you an example of all the known genes that have some effect on weight, if a single individual had every single one of those that we know about, it would only increase your risk for weight issues by like a few percentage points. So it's not all that tremendous. But the estimation is that looking across the entire population, somewhere around 40% of the variation in weight is genetically based, okay? Now, I talk about this genetic environment interaction. So you're predisposed to have issues based on your environment, okay? Someone who was around 100 years ago and they're working in the field, eating fruits and vegetables, very active all day, eating a healthy nutrition, a healthy diet, they likely were very lean. Okay, fast forward to today, that same person, same genes, they might sit in the car on the way to work, sit at a desk all day long, and then eat calorie-dense food and too much of it. All of a sudden they gain weight, okay, depending on their genetics. Someone who's not genetically predisposed to that may be able to tolerate modern society like that and not gain weight. So I don't want anyone to think they're doomed with genetics, especially with how much I've mentioned it throughout this energy expenditure talk here. So, all right, so just to wrap up here, energy expenditure, it's one part of the equation with calories in, calories out, all sorts of complicated stuff that goes into here. But as far as energy expenditure on the calorie outside, it's your total energy expenditure is made up of your resting energy expenditure, your thermic effect of food, and your exercise expended by physical activity, which is broken down into exercise time and non-exercise time. All right, so any questions? We'll talk about it later. Get a hold of me, let me know. Thanks again for listening. We'll talk to you next time. Dr. Weber.
Be sure to schedule your free 30-minute initial phone consultation by sending me an email or by visiting our website at refinedwellnessconsulting.com.